probably the biggest part, or what we saw with Mendelian genetics, was that there was contrasting traits, right? And what do I mean by contrasting traits, Sergeant? Like I'm going through notes right now, so I probably recommend having maybe something out because this would probably explain, not you specifically, but the low test scores that we have in here on Bailey, which I did correct the last quiz and they weren't good either. So maybe we'd like to take some notes, maybe you'd like to actually jot some things down to study and try to remember for the test here when it comes up. Okay, so we're talking, again, Mendelian genetics, we're talking contrasting traits. What does it mean when I say contrasting traits? Yesterday, I wrote it on the board for yesterday. So again, it's not rocket science. I'm not even asking you guys to think outside the box on this one. Okay, it was on the board. You wrote it down. Should have. Probably did. That's fine. What do you mean? There's something, yeah.
Eye color?
Yeah, so give me an example. In eye color, yeah, for the most part it does, but there are some differences there. Okay? Because when you look at eye color, it's not an either or situation, right? I mean, I know you've got, like, we've talked dark eyes versus light eyes, right? But even then, when we look at all the eye color, and we did discuss eye color yesterday, there's a variation, there's a variety to it, right? Okay, so that's kind of what we're getting away from. With Mendelian crosses, yeah, so it's an either or, right? Earlobes attached or they're not, right? Whether you can roll your tongue or you can't. Okay, that's a dominant versus recessive trait. Whether you have mid-digit hair, so if you've got hair right in between your knuckles, that is a dominant versus recessive trait. Okay, most things I will tell you probably not. I'm going to throw a percentage out there. It's not an accurate percentage. Okay, I can't back up my research on it, but I would probably say 75%, right, of like traits are contrasting. It's like either you have this or you have that. Okay. Now we also talked about, well, how many alleles make up a contrasting trait? How many alleles have we dealt with here in the last couple of days? Just two. Yeah, it's like if we're talking flower color, you either have the purple allele or you have the white allele. Whatever, how they blend then determines your color, right? Okay. If you, again, with polydactyl, right, with the 6 fingers, it's like, okay, you either have the allele for 6 fingers or you have the allele for 5 fingers, right? And then how that blend is, right, well, that ultimately depends on where you're at. Now, when we go through non-Mendelian genetics, we throw all things off the table. Okay, there's nothing wrong with what Mendel basically told us. There's nothing wrong with everything that we've discussed. Everything is correct. Everything is accurate. But now, these are the exceptions. These are the things that are coming up now that researchers have found after Mendel did his cross, right, that don't necessarily apply to what he showed us. Okay, and the 3 that we're going to cover, right, are going to be sex-linked traits. We'll explain that a little bit as we go on. Right, we're going to talk incomplete dominance, and then we're going to talk codominance today. Okay? And so those are the 3. And there's other ones that are going to come up. Multiple alleles will come up. Epistatic traits will come up. And so there's some other things that are going to be, but these are going to be the 3 major ones that we're going to talk about today. All right? And so pretty easy to actually understand. Because if we're talking sex-linked traits, what are we referring to? Gender, okay? 1, gender. Basically, we're looking at the gender. We're looking at traits that are found on specific gender chromosomes, right? So for that, well, where do we got to go? We go over to this little guy over here, okay? And if you remember, this is our karyotype, right? We have 23 pairs of chromosomes. But at the beginning of this unit, we separated that group of chromosomes into 2. And we said that the first 22 were called what?
Is that the diploid?
No,
Diploids?
They're all diploid for the most part. Starts with an A. If you don't know it, write it down. It's called autosomal. We did talk about this early on, okay? So good. Things you probably need to write down and actually take note of, okay? So the first 22 are autosomal, okay? The X and the Y, Riley said, basically those are our what? Our sex, our gender, right? Chromosomes, okay? The ones that determine your gender. But that's not it. It's not just determining your gender when we look at those, okay? Because what you're also going to find is you're going to find special qualities like hemophiliac. You're going to see male pattern baldness. You're going to see red-green colorblind. They're also found on those chromosomes. So it's not just say, hey, you got a Y, you're going to be a male. There's other traits that come along with that. Okay, so we'll explain that as time goes on. But they're only found Sex-linked traits are only found on the X and Y. And the difference between those two is that if we're looking at the first 22, everybody has them. Male or female, we all have the same first 22 chromosomes. Now the differences come in, well, if we start looking at the X and the Y, not everybody has the same, okay? Some people have XX, which makes you biologically a what? A girl. Some people have XY, which makes you biologically a male, right? Okay, there's even cases where you may have an XYY or an XXY. You may have 3 X's. Okay, we'll talk about those traits here, a little bit more in the future. But again, when you start looking at it, if girls don't have a Y, okay, there are probably some traits that they're not going to have, obviously, right? Okay, if boys only have 1 X, well, there's some rules that are a little bit different to them compared to the females that have 2 X's. Okay, so we'll talk about that and how they impact the genders a little bit different. Okay, if we're talking incomplete dominance, what does in mean as a prefix? Not. So there is no what? No complete dominance. If there's no complete dominance, that means when you put 2 alleles together, not one is dominant over the other. So instead, you get them to do what? They do what? They blend. Yeah, they come together. They mix, right? They're going to blend. What if you have codominance? What does co mean? Say it again. Yeah? What'd you say? What does co mean? Together. If you co-op, what do? Together, yeah. So together, together they're both alleles are dominant. There's not one that is dominant over the other, but here in Kate, they both show. Okay, and I'll bring those up here in a little bit. We'll talk examples. I just want to get that kind of out there as far as the big picture, things we're going to talk about. Okay, and how it's different compared to the dominant versus recessive traits, or what we call complete dominance that we've already discussed. Okay, all right, so here's where we're at. Sex-linked traits. Okay, so if you remember again, you guys have told me enough, and I'll just, again, it's going to be redundant. Females XX, males are XY. Okay, so we're talking specifically in a sex-linked condition. These are only found on the X chromosomes. Okay, there are some that you're going to find on the Y. It's only pertaining to men because they are, obviously, that's the only person that can get it. But why we talk about them specifically with the X chromosome is because, again, in the case of female versus males, we only have 1 X. Females, they have 2. So there's some different rules that apply for the males versus the females. Okay, now what is the same is that for females who are carrying both the XX, okay, all rules apply that we have discussed with Mendelian genetics. In that, in order for them to get a dominant trait, how many alleles do they need to have? At least what? To have the dominant trait. Yeah, you just only need 1 dominant. You're still going to have 2 alleles total. I don't disagree with that. But all they need is 1 dominant allele, right? At least 1. It doesn't matter what that other one is. In order to carry a recessive trait, how many recessive alleles do they need? They need 2. Yeah. So a lot of these traits that we're going to talk about today are going to be recessive, meaning that in order for a female to get them, they have to have both alleles. Okay? Does that make sense to you? So if we talk about color blindness, for example, right? You got to find both colorblind alleles on there. It doesn't mean it's dominant. It just means it's the colorblind allele, which is recessive. Okay? Are we all good on that? Okay? Now, what do we know about a male? Male's XY. How many X's do males have? 1. So what they get is what they get. Okay? So here, female could be carrying the colorblind allele, for example. They don't have it. If the male is a carrier, guess what? He has it. It's either you have it or you don't. But with the females, again, it's different because now we go back to, well, if it's heterozygous, it doesn't have it. Right? If it's homozygous dominant, it doesn't have it. If it's homozygous recessive, like we see here, they have it. So would you likely see it more in males or more in females? Yeah, because again, what they get is what they get. So anytime that we start looking at these sex-linked traits, we're going to find them predominantly, okay, found in males. All right, and I would probably throw that down in there somewhere just to know. All right, so more in males. Okay. Now, also, as we go on, understanding that not all offspring or not all organisms basically fall into the XXXY chromosomes. Okay, take a look at birds for the most part. Birds actually XX equal the males. Okay, XY equal females. Honeybees are completely different, right? They actually have to have a gene turned on. They could be basically a female can be a female, but it can't go on and have babies unless a certain gene is turned on. And so again, we start looking, there's all these different basically scenarios that come in, but we're going to talk about today with sexting because we're going to talk primarily with humans. Okay. So here's what we've got. With most of these, if you're looking like at baldness, for example, we call it male pattern baldness. Again, why? Because generally men get it, right? Females can females have or be or carry, can they undergo male pattern baldness? Yes, just doesn't happen very often. Okay, they can do it. Okay, some of the other ones that come up, color blindness, we're talking specifically red-green colorblind. Okay, so again, I think, not to throw people under the bus, I think Coach Heasley, Mr. Heasley is red-green colorblind if I'm not mistaken. And it's weird because you can see shapes, you can see other colors, but when you put red and green dots and stuff together, basically it's just, for the most part, it's gray. I mean, that's what it looks like, and you can't see. You can see tones maybe. Is he? Yeah. And so even then there's different severities too when it comes to it, right? Like sometimes you can pick up the tones, but you can't, sometimes you can't see it at all. It just depends on the severity of what you have. But, okay, that's one of them. The other one we start looking at is hemophilia. Okay, and hemophilia is the body's inability for the blood to clot. Okay? Hemophiliac. Yep. Okay. So, what does that mean? When you think about it, it's kind of an alarming statement to think that your blood can't clot. Okay, now, obviously things are different now with the medicinal world, and we've got, ways to kind of control things a little bit better. But if you take that person 100 or 150 years ago, that's a hemophiliac, okay, what happens? Yeah, they're going to bleed out. And we're not talking just simply a cut. And it could be a very small cut, right? Okay, and it's continuously just going to bleed and bleed and bleed. But think about bruising, because what is bruising? It's internal what? Internal bleeding. Yeah, that's why you bruise. And so again, if you've got somebody that is contact sports, you've got somebody that just a kid walking around that is hemophiliac and they hit their body against the table or hit their head and all of a sudden they get a bruise, that just keeps bleeding and bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. Now we're talking again a long time ago, that just led to immediate death. Right, because they had no way to control it. So there's a lot of individuals, if they were hemophiliacs, they never even went on to reproduce and never even went on to be able to really live a long life because they would die at an early age because they would just bleed out, right? But now, again, we've got certain things that we can do. We got medicines that people can take to help slow that process down a little bit, right? Because I know there's some hemophiliacs that are around, right? So other than that, they got to live in a bubble, right? Okay, you got bubble boy going on. Basically, you're gonna put them. They can bounce all over the place and do whatever. Just make sure that they get damaged, right? Make sure they don't get hurt. Okay, but so again, and I've already kind of explained a little bit that when males are afflicted with the recessive condition, right, basically they are going to have it, right? They're going to get it more often than you're going to find because there's only that one X, all right? So we're going to talk about this today, but we did discuss, right, this question a little bit at the beginning of our unit, and we talked about male pattern baldness. And the one question that come up, it said, well, where would you go, all right, if you wanted to determine if you're at high risk for male pattern baldness? What would you look for? Okay, and you wouldn't necessarily look at your mom or your dad, okay? In this case, if it was me, I wouldn't look at my dad because my dad gave me what chromosome? X or Y? He gave me the Y. He never gave, whatever he has as an X has nothing to do with me, okay? My X chromosome came from my mom, okay? Well, why wouldn't I look at my mother then for male pattern baldness? Because how many X's does she have? She has 2. So she would probably be a carrier, all right? But she is not bald because she has that other X with nothing on it, okay? This is kind of unique to even go back and think about, consideration, right? But you take a look at my mother again. Whoops. Let's go. I don't know what I just did there, but let me go back. Can I get out of there? If I go, there we go. How can that happen? There we go. Let's go that. Go back up. So we'll discard those. So when you think about, again, the situation that occurs or that did occur, okay, because I do have another brother, or I do have a brother, right? And so when I look at that overall, that whole process, my mother was more than likely a a carrier, and I'm going to use this as a little b just to show that it's recessive, right, in that situation, right? So when you take a look at the offspring she produced, either she's going to give that allele or she's going to give that allele, right? Well, which one did I get? I mean, it's no secret I'm bald, right? So which one did I get? I got this one right over here, right? The one on the left. My brother, nice flowing head of hair, right? He got the good part of it. Okay, which one did he get? He got that one. Okay, but now why do we want to go to our grandfather, maternal grandfather? Because one, we're not going to probably see it on our mom, right? But why the grandfather is such a good indicator? Because if I go to my mom's grandma and or if I go to my mom's mom and dad, excuse me, my grandfather and grandmother, okay, well, where did she have to at least get one X from? From her dad, right? Okay, now it's not a 100% foolproof like, hey, my grandpa's bald or not bald, I'm not going to be bald. Because again, he could not be bald, but my mom's mom could also be a carrier, right? And she could have possibly passed that one down to my mother, who would then pass that down to me. But why we go to the male side is because, again, how many X's do they have? Just one. And if he has it, there's a pretty good chance that if his daughter has boys, they're probably going to have it as well, or a better chance. But it's not a foolproof method. It's not like 100% here is what's going to happen. But it does give you a pretty decent indicator, right, of what's going on. All right. So as we've already talked, first 22 pairs, autosomal chromosomes, right? Okay. The last X and Y are what we call sex chromosomes. Write that down. Get to know that because there will be questions on the exam that are going to deal with autosomal traits versus sex-linked traits. And you've got to know what that term means. So again, everything up to right here are considered autosomal. Those two are called the sex chromosomes. And they are going to be used primarily to determine gender. But we also know that there are other conditions, traits that we can find on there. Okay? You guys got that down? Can I go on? All right, let's do a couple problems. Show you guys kind of what you're going to be doing primarily with this. Okay? So we've got a woman with a colorblind father marries a man who sees color normally. A lot going on there. Okay, so we're going to have to go through and dissect this. Okay? What is the percent chance of having a colorblind child, a colorblind daughter, and then we also have a son that is colorblind? Okay? So the first thing that we need to determine is what? What do we need to determine? First, it's a sex-linked trait. We told you that right off the bat. Okay? But what do we need to determine about this in order to continue on? What's the first step? Okay, but how do we fill in the chart? What don't we know yet? Yeah, go ahead. Just say it. Say it again. The father of the man? No. How do we fill in that chart? What do we got to know in order to fill in that chart? We got to know what the genotype is of the boy or the girl, right? We've got to know what they are. Okay, we don't come out and just say that it's heterozygous, homozygous. We're not giving you that. We've got to determine what that is. Okay, and even then, there's some things where we've got to try to figure out here a little bit because when I take a look, one, it tells me there is a woman. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start marking down. Well, there's my X. There's the woman. Okay, she has a colorblind father. Okay, so if I break that back or if I back build that, here is the dad, here is the mom. She has a colorblind father. Okay, what does that mean about the girl? Yeah, she is a carrier, right? Okay. And we don't really know anything else. Okay, but that's what we do know. And so that's where we're going to leave it right there. Okay, that we assume that she's a carrier. Okay, because it doesn't give us any other information. Now, she marries a man. Generally, when I put a line across horizontally here, that means that is a marriage or that is a if they've had offspring. Okay, so now you got the man. Okay, man sees color normally. So what's not on his X chromosome? The allele, the colorblind allele. He has a normal allele right on there. So I'm not going to signate. So this is what we're looking at. Here's the genotype, right? Okay, so when I break this down, we put females over here, male up here. Okay, so what is the probability? First question that was asked. What is the percent chance, okay, probability of having a colorblind child? Okay, here 50. Is that right? Okay. Colorblind or not?
Or not.
Not. Why? Why is it not? Because she needs how many? She needs both. Remember, this is a recessive condition, right? She needs two. She doesn't have it, so she's not colorblind. He is colorblind. She's not. He's not. So therefore, there's a 25% probability, right, of having a colorblind child. What about having a colorblind daughter? 0%. Now the next question, right, it's a little bit different. Okay, the next question is asking a son being colorblind. So basically they're saying that if you have a son, what is the percent chance, right, that it will be colorblind? Not asking as a whole, just specifically if you have a boy, what is the chance? 50%, exactly. Okay, all right, and that's how we'd go through and simply answer those questions there. All right, you guys have that on there, obviously. Maybe jumped ahead, got the answers. I don't really care. All right, we're heading in the right direction. All right, male pattern baldness. Yeah, it's found on the X chromosome. We really date ourselves when we bring up the Jerry Springer show in here. I probably need to change that to maybe like Maury Povich or something like that. But Jerry Springer was a talk show back like 1990s, be on from like 10 to 11 o'clock, and they'd have like, you know, the guy that slept with like, I don't know, like 3 sisters and like, you know, just they had like 4 multiple babies and they get on TV and they'd start arguing with each other. And then the guy probably slept with the girl's mom or something like that. I don't know. Then there'd be this big fight, this battle, and people would be ripping each other's hair out. And then they got to get a bouncer up on the stage and the whole crowd would be yelling, and just whatever else. And yeah, so I mean, that was basically what we did at 10 o'clock at night, right, back in the 1990s when we were watching a little bit of TV show, right? So they would just find people just to pull on there and just put on a show. All right, anyway. So here's what we're looking at. We've got a male pattern baldness is found on the X chromosome. It's recessive. Okay. On a Jerry Springer show, a bald female talked about life without hair. All right. Just sad. All right. Which of the following would be possible genetic reasons for her baldness? Okay. So if we take a look, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out what we know about this. Okay. And I know that, first of all, she is a female and she is bald, right? So therefore, she is carrying both of those alleles, right, on her X chromosomes. Okay, now, if you notice, most of these questions are going to be about mom and dad or grandparents. So right away, I'm probably going to start back building this. I'm going to start to determine, okay, well, one, obviously there was a mom and a dad, right, that were involved in the production of her, right? Okay, so she had to get one X from dad, which means that he was also bald because he gave her the bald allele on one of those. And then what do we probably know about mom? I mean, what can we at least assume at this point in time? She's a carrier, right? Okay, maybe not have it. I don't know. It doesn't really give us that information. It doesn't matter. Okay, so if we take a look, number one, her dad was bald, the mom were bald. Could that be a possibility? It could be, right? We just know she's at least a carrier, but she absolutely could have been bald. Okay, so one would have been good. Okay, her dad was normal, but her mom was bald. Can't be right. Dad at least has to be, he's got to be bald in this case, right? Okay, both her dad and mom were normal, but mom was a carrier. Again, can't be because dad has to be, right? Her dad was a carrier and mom was normal. And we got to be kind of careful because I don't disagree, because what I don't like about the term that's being used is that anytime you imply a carrier, you're kind of saying that they have it, they have the allele, but they don't have the trait. But if he's a carrier, that means he has it in this case, right? So I would probably argue the fact that you could say 4 is right. Her dad was bald. The maternal grandfather was also bald. Possibly, right? Because again, what do we do in the past? We can back build. Even this mom, we can go back and take a look at mom and dad, right? And it is possible that that X that she got with the allele on it came from grandpa, right? Okay. So again, we could look at 5. 5 could also be right when we talk about sex-linked traits. Okay. All right. Questions there. Okay. So you're going to ask some questions. You're going to be asked some questions. You've got to be able to determine, again, the difference between complete dominance, like we talk with Mendel genetics, and sex-linked traits. Sex-linked traits are found predominantly on the X chromosome, making sure that you can, again, kind of follow that little flow of what's on the X's and where they come from and everything else, okay? Do we need to do any more questions? You guys think you're fine there? Yep, you guys are okay. Okay, all right, let's go on. Incomplete dominance. What do we say? Incomplete dominance is what? Yeah, not completely dominant, right? So here's the situation. Okay, we end up having, right, a case of like a red flower versus a white flower, but instead of getting a red or getting a white, we get what? Say it again. Blended. And so if you put red and white together, what color do you get? You get pink. Yeah, so you're not getting a red, you're not getting a white. Okay, but what's unique about this, right, is that the alleles are still there. Like you still have a red allele and you still have a white allele. Okay? And so when you look at basically the crossing of incomplete dominance, there's the blending of the two alleles. And heterozygous condition is intermediate. It's not that one is dominant over the other. It's just that you have a blend of those two alleles. So the example that we give you is that we get purebred blue-winged butterfly. Okay, and in this case, we're going to want to still use our alleles like we did with like dominant versus recessive and so on down the line, is that I'm going to give the genotype of that blue-winged butterfly. I'm just going to give it like a big B, big B. Okay, something like that there. Okay? Yeah, the whole box right there. Just take the box, whatever you got to. And then when we look at the white-winged butterfly, okay, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at basically still giving it, I don't like using different letters, and I'll explain why in a little bit. That refers to a different type of genetics. And so here I'm just going to use little b, okay, for the white allele. And it's not the dominant versus recessive in this case by any means. It's just when you put two letters down, you're almost referring to two different traits, right? And it's just easier just to put these together, all right? So, or to keep it as B's. So now when I cross, every single one of these is heterozygous, right? Which means, what color would all of them be? They're all light blue, exactly. But what are they still carrying? Even though they're all light blue, what are they still carrying? Yeah, the blue allele, and they're still carrying the white allele. So if we would allow that F1 generation to go on and reproduce and form an F2 generation, okay, so all heterozygous, they're going to cross with each other. Here's what I would end up with. Okay, so what's my ratio? What's that guy right there? Okay, 1 to 2 to 1 as far as genotype goes. How about phenotype? What color? Blue. Okay, dark blue. What color? Light blue, and white. So it wouldn't be like a 3 to 1 ratio like we see with the other ones where they're all blue. Now we've got a dark blue, we've got two light blues, and then we've also got those white ones. Okay, so even though they turn out as a blend, they're still carrying, again, those white or those so-called blue alleles. Sir?
How do we know when they're mixed?
We'll tell you.
Okay.
Yeah, or you'll see like this, for example. We got a purebred blue, purebred white. They all end up light blue. So, again, you're just assuming at that point in time that it's incomplete dominance. Okay. But we'll tell you, right? Like in the assignment I'm going to give you guys tomorrow, the first half, it says incomplete dominance. That's when you apply it. Second half, co-dominance. Then you apply. Yep. So don't think too hard about that. We'll definitely let you guys know. Now, one of the ones that we find in the human body, right, is going to be basically skin color. It's a form of incomplete dominance, right? And when you look around the room again, right, every single one of us has, I know it's South Dakota, it's wintertime, everybody's pale right now, but every single one of us, you take us out in the summertime or spring, we're going to have a little bit different complexion, right? And you can even tell complexion based on probably hair color and eye color. And generally, if you've got darker hair, you've got darker eyes, you're probably also going to have darker skin complexion. If you've got lighter hair and you've got lighter eyes, that probably also means that you've got relatively pale skin, right? Just lighter skin. So here's why this works. Okay, and here's how this works. And I always bring up the example when we start looking at like skin color, for example. I bring up my kids, right? And I brought this up before, right? But we start looking at, again, my wife and I, dark hair, dark eyes. Again, it's South Dakota wintertime, not dark right now, but it doesn't take much for us to bronze, right? We get a nice little base coat going in the summertime. It's just golden tan from there on, right? Okay, so when you look at the situation, how did we produce children that have blonde hair and blue eyes? It's like, again, if you would expect, right, to have children, you'd expect them to have dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin, right? That's not the case whatsoever. Now, I'm going to throw in another form of an inheritance pattern here at you guys. Okay, and it is called multiple alleles. Actually, I'm going to write this here just so I can keep my notes relatively similar. Okay, so with multiple alleles, multiple obviously means many. We're talking about a trait having more than 2 alleles. Okay, so I'm going to throw a number out there. This is not an accurate representation, but it's about as close as I can possibly get. So if I look at basically, let's say skin tone is determined by 6 alleles. So multiple alleles will determine this. Okay, and I also know that there is a form of incomplete dominance with this, which means that there would be a blend. Okay, it kind of works maybe something like this. Let's say, for example, just like based on my wife and myself, maybe we have 4 of the 6 that are dominant. And I use kind of the shading in to represent dominant or to represent pigment. Okay, so in the blending, what's that mean? Are we darker or are we lighter? Yeah, we're going to be a little bit darker. Why are we going to be a little bit darker? What do we have? We have more dark than we do light, right? If I only had 1 or 2 of those, that would mean I would be relatively light-skinned, right? So based on how many pigmented alleles you have, that's how dark your skin is and dark your hair is and dark your eyes are, okay? That's kind of what we're looking at there. So when you look at it, I'm going to give 3 to my kids. My wife's also going to give 3 to our kids. Well, which 3 could they be? What if they're those 3? Now, all of a sudden, if we talk Creighton or Chesney, and I've got those first 2 that are crossed in, their skin tone is going to be relatively what? Relatively light. Yeah. And if I would expand on it even more, there could be more, again, light-skinned or non-pigmented alleles that they could get, which would make their skin a little bit lighter. So the multiple alleles come in, right, and help that blending out a little bit because, again, ultimately I shouldn't say helping, but that's why we see all the different combinations, right, is because there's multiple alleles that basically form that, which means that you're going to get basically this whole range from very light to having no pigment at all, which is what? Albino. We're talking red eyes. We're talking powder hair and powder skin, right? So eventually, again, you're talking basically completely pigmented, which obviously we know is a little bit different when we start talking about races and so on down the line, right? Excuse me. But that's what we're looking at as far as the skin color goes, okay? So we've got incomplete dominance. Questions there, okay? Now, and again, you're going to see, just remember, heterozygous is basically the blend of those 2 alleles. One of the other ones that'll come up, and I'm going to briefly just talk about this. It's called roan, okay? And roan is a color usually determined in horses and cattle. There's a little controversy with roan. You're going to read some books where roan is considered incomplete dominance. Because what you end up doing is you end up taking like a red horse and you cross it with like a cream-colored horse or a white horse, and you end up getting a blend in between. But the blend isn't because there's necessarily a combination of the colors. It's because you've got tiny little white spots and you've got tiny little red spots. And when you stand back and look at them, those little dots blend together and they end up forming more of a blend type of coloration. So a lot of people are like, well, it's a blending. And when I look at it, it's not a true red or white. It's not, spots necessarily from afar, right? What it comes down to is this blending of these colors. But then there's also people out there like, well, and I'll explain codominance here in a little bit, that it's basically a form of codominance, right? Because again, you're getting a red and white spot. So tomorrow you're going to see a question about roan horses or roan cattle, right? But it's going to be in the form of incomplete dominance that when you take the 2, put them together, right, they're going to end up blending together, right? All right. Anyway, that's about all I'm going to say there for that guy. Okay, let's talk codominance. Got a little bit we need to discuss here. So in the case of codominance, what we are looking at is both possible alleles are dominant. Okay, now we're going to start to use like 2 different letters, right? And we want to use 2 different letters because they are their own, they're both dominant, right? And so I can't use a big B and a big B because you're representing it's the same letter. How do you know which one is which? So we're going to use a different letter, okay? So both traits are expressed in some form, right? We usually kind of have like more of a spotted form. A calico cat is codominant trait. Okay, the calico behind it, the coloration. How do we know it's a codominant trait? What is a calico cat? Whole bunch of different colors. Yeah, you've got red, you've got black, you've got white, you've got brown. So every single one of those colors they're dominant, okay? Because one doesn't mask the other. Okay, snapdragon is a form of a flower. If you take a red one, cross it with a yellow one, right, you can get a red flower with yellow spots, or you get a yellow flower with the red spots. It just depends on how you want to see it, how you perceive it. Okay, so none of them go away. They don't blend together. It's just you've got one and the other on the same spot. Okay, so if we're going to do something like the red and the yellow flower, for example, the red flower would be, the red flower would just be like a big R, or the red allele, and then like the yellow would be like a YY allele. So you'd still use, in this case, like an R and a Y. The Y would represent the yellow allele. The red would represent the red allele. Okay, but we're going to go a little bit further, okay, because we're going to talk about blood types in humans, which is a form of codominant expression or an inheritance pattern. Okay, but we also throw in, if you guys remember, I said before, if you have more than two alleles, we also call that multiple alleles. Okay, so we can also take a look at blood type being a codominant inheritance pattern, but it can also be multiple alleles because there is more than two. And here's what we've got. You've got an A allele in blood types, right? We've got a B allele in blood types. And then we also have a recessive form, which would kind of be considered our O allele if we're talking blood types, okay? In this case, A and B are codominant. So if A and B come together, what do you get? You got AB blood, right? Okay? If A and the little I come together, you have what? A-type blood. But it'd be A because A is dominant over I, right? Okay, if you have the B and the I come together, you have B-type blood. Okay, if you have two A's, you have A. Okay, if you have two B's, you have B. If you got the two recessive guys, you have O-type blood. Okay, does everybody know what the blood type is in here? I don't. I can't remember anymore. I have no. And what's that? Yours O. We've done this in class before. We kind of stopped doing it just for obvious reasons of just people not liking it. People poke their finger, blood would shoot all over the place, and it was actually just more of a hassle than anything. But we used to do this in here. And there's also a story of a girl. I wish I could remember this. That and maybe it was a myth. I don't know if it's a myth, but that when they did the blood type, she went back and they were talking about the whole genetic side of this, and she went back to her mom and dad and asked what blood type is, and it's like, something doesn't line up. Later found out that she was adopted, didn't know it. Right? And they didn't tell her, but she found out she was adopted because the blood types didn't match up, right? And so again, another reason, like I'm scared of something like that occurring in here because all of a sudden around home it's like, that doesn't work. Anyway, we'll stop there. But so we don't do it anymore. But again, if you know it, there's reasons and why you actually have your blood type. Because again, you're getting an allele from mom, you're getting an allele from dad. That blend is determining what your code is. Okay, now. But here's the real basics. Here's the actual biology behind blood type. Okay, now, so genes for both code for what we call glycoproteins. Okay, on the surface, all right? Glycoproteins, just remember, they're a protein that you're going to find on the surface of a blood cell. Okay, so if you have A allele, it's going to code for a certain protein that is found on the surface of the cell. If you have the B allele, it's going to code for a different protein that is found on the surface side of the cell. If you have the O allele, or the little I, you have no protein. Okay? And here's kind of what it looks like. So on the board, I apologize for you people that may be watching the video, but on the board, what we have is basically what I would consider to be an A-type blood. Okay? This is not like, how do I want to say it? It's not completely correct, all right? I mean, these shapes and stuff are not what it actually is, okay? It's more than this. But when I look at the A allele, basically the marker is shaped kind of like a lollipop, okay? If I look at a B allele, for example, the B allele here in this case is shaped like a diamond, okay? So when I look at an A-type blood cell, notice it has what on the outside? It has the A little proteins, right? It has this guy right here. Okay, determines that. When I look at B-type blood, notice what it has. It's got the little diamond-shaped proteins on it, right? Okay? When I look at AB blood, look at what it has. I don't know why that's. Oh, yeah, anyway. It has both A and B markers on it. Okay? And when I look at O type blood, right, what do we notice? There is none of them. Yeah.
What are the, so like on A, what are the other ones?
Okay, now, remember our cells, okay, communicate with each other, right? Okay, so when they communicate with each other, how we know whether something belongs in our body or whether it doesn't is based on these surface markers. Okay? So for example, we have always talked about, we'll talk about this a little more, like, we have naturally producing painkillers that we make inside of our body. Okay? We can also take drugs, right? What do they do? Basically the same thing. So what's unique about the drugs and what's unique about the chemical that we produce inside of our body, they have the same shape. So when we have receptors in our body that take those on, it's like, oh, you're a painkiller, right? What are we going to do? We're going to help block out the pain, which is why people get basically addicted to codeine, right? Which is why people get heroin, right? Stuff like that, because they all do the exact same thing as a chemical that naturally works inside of our body, okay? Same thing here. We know whether things belong or don't belong based on these markers that are on the outside of their cells, okay? So for example, we have these markers, but we also have what they call antibodies, okay, on the outside. Now, if you take a look, these antibodies also have a very specific shape, but they are meant to receive or be a receptor. And what shape would fit nicely right into that? Say it again. Say it again. Yeah, the diamond, exactly. This guy right here. So if you would happen to, if an A and B type blood come in contact with each other, that little guy is going to fit nicely right into there, or vice versa. That little guy is going to fit nicely right into there. And what happens? Dude. If you have A type blood, can you take B type blood for blood transfusion? No, what happens? Blood starts to do what? Rejects it, clots up. Yeah, you actually could die from it. Yeah, if somebody gives you, which way you go to the hospital, you got blood transfusion. Well, what type do you have? I got A. Okay, we can give you A type blood. Right? We can't give you B because it won't mix. It actually coagulates. It'll clot up and then eventually won't work. Why? Based on this right here. Okay? So if you have an A allele, you're going to get this kind of a cell. Okay? If you have A type blood, something like this is going to happen. B type blood, something like that's going to happen. What's up?
Is that why the O negatives can go to anything? It's because they're
okay. So now, when I take a look at AB blood, notice what is not found on AB blood. There's no receptors, right? So if there's no receptors, guess what can go to AB blood? Everything. So if you have AB, boyfriend? No. See, if you have AB blood, okay, what does that mean? You can take in anything, right? So you are considered to be a universal recipient, okay? If you have O, notice what's not there. There's no what? Yeah, there's no AB stuff going on. So which means that O-type blood is not the universal recipient, it's actually the what? Yeah, universal donor. It can go to anybody. Now you also throw in the negatives and the positives. Okay, one thing you need to understand, this is just one form of blood. Okay, and we're talking these antigens, we're talking these particles that you find on the cells. So you can also throw in the positive negatives. Okay, there's also an M and an N type. I've not done it. There's also an M and an N type blood. Okay, that we're going to find in there. Right? Again, these are the only ones that are really kind of deadly to the human body. So we don't even bring up the M versus the N's. We don't. I mean, our positive, our negative. There is a difference there when you start looking at it a little bit, but they're all basically referring to these markers that you're going to find on the outside of the cell. Okay, so now what does this mean for you guys? Okay, if we take a look at a question, all right, and the question, for example, Bill has type AB blood, all right, Maria has type O blood. Okay, what are the potential blood types of their offspring? And if Maria has a child with O type blood, could it be Bill's? I don't know. Okay, what do you know about Bill? AB. So what I want to do is, this case, I'm going to use the letter I. I stands for immunoglobulin. Okay, it's basically just saying here is a blood type. right? Or here's an allele. And he's going to have an I with an A on it, which means that it is A, right? And he's going to have an I with a B on it, okay, which means the B allele. Okay? Maria has type O, which means she's carrying what? The two little I's, recessive form. So they can only have a child with A type blood or a child with B type blood. Meaning that if she had a child with O type blood, guess what?
Not
It's
Bill's.
not, I know. It's not Bill's. Not Bill. Right?
Poor
Exactly.
Bill.
Yeah, poor Bill. Bill's got a long road ahead of him, right? Okay. All right. Now I am done. Okay, there you guys go.